We're very happy that you're able to join us today. Some of you, we sort of all trickled in, so you got to hear us already chatting about exciting things that educators have been doing with children. And I love that beginning because we really want this to be a welcoming and joyous space to talk about something that can obviously feel less than joyful, but we are gathered together to have this wonderful conversation with our panelists. And before we begin, I wanted to do two things. First, to go over the plan for the hour, and then to introduce the topic briefly, and then I will ask our panelists to introduce themselves. So during this time when we're asking questions of the panelists, we encourage you to submit a question. If you would please remain on mute just so we don't get feedback. Then that would be great, but we would love it if you would submit a question for us to read to the panelists at the end of our time together. In the final 10 minutes, my colleague Danae will share some of those questions that have been submitted from the audience. So this topic is a really critical one, and it impacts early care and education from the ways in which we're able to interact with children in classrooms to our ability to safely serve families and maintain center budgets. And the National Association of the Education of Young Children beautifully sums up the situation in its recent statement, "There's no going back, childcare after COVID-19." And they write, "Our nation's early childhood education programs have been navigating structural cracks and financial cliffs for decades. The COVID-19 pandemic has made these cracks and cliffs unavoidable, putting our programs into free fall. If our economy is to recover, it will require a reimagined approach to financing and structuring the systems that support high-quality childcare. The childcare crisis will not be solved by simply reopening childcare. The math speaks for itself. Public health guidelines that rightly require smaller group sizes, stronger ratios, and increased spending on sanitation, all of those things, combined with lower enrollment and the same fixed costs, will equal financial insolvency. And in the absence of additional investment, that means program closure. In other words, opening childcare will mean closing childcare unless we make ongoing, consistent, and substantial public, private, and philanthropic investments that pay for programs to exist throughout the entire economic recovery. But let's go a step further. Before COVID-19, even at full enrollment, the childcare market was broken. The way the system is financed left too few children with access to high-quality early childhood settings, too many early childhood educators living on poverty-level wages, and too many programs one rent payment away from closing down. We can't go from the proverbial frying pan into the fire, from this crisis of COVID back to the crisis that was already defining our early learning systems. We must learn from some of the good policy and financing choices that state leaders and policymakers in particular have made in the midst of this disaster to move forward and not return to the way things were before. The pandemic has laid bare the need to finally resolve the fundamental challenges that have confronted us for decades, those which, if resolved appropriately, will support a strong American workforce and economy, propel far more children into high-quality childcare, and ensure the essential status of early childhood educators, and that it is permanently reflected by increased investments in their education and compensation." So I thought that was a beautiful way to frame what's going on in the national landscape. And today we have our panelists to provide personal perspectives on the ways that COVID has impacted them and their work within this national landscape. We have two wonderful early childhood educators working in different contexts, and we have a wonderful administrator and a fantastic early childhood advocate. And so without further ado, I would like to ask our panel guests to introduce themselves. We don't have an agreed upon order, just occurred to me. So Robin, you're first in my little Zoom view here. Would you mind kicking us off and telling us who you are and what your context is, a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Good morning, guys. So glad y'all are here with us today. I'm Robin Smith, and I received my undergraduate and master's degree from the University of Arkansas. At the time I graduated, it was not the BK licensure. It was a child development degree. So anyway, I've been in the public schools for, this is my 15th year. So I taught in Springdale for several years, and now I'm in Prairie Grove. And we have a small program here. I am in the classroom, but also in the role of director. So, and we are an ABC program. So we receive all our funding from ABC grants and follow their guidelines. And we are in the Prairie Grove Public Schools.
Thank you, Robin. Jennifer, you're next in my view. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and what your context is?
Sure. I am Jennifer Kesselring, and I am at Riverfield Country Day School in Tulsa. And we are a school that welcomes children 8 weeks through 12th grade. And one of the roles that I have here is head of the preschool, which is the 8 weeks through 5. And we have 11 classrooms and about 28 teachers here. And I have been at Riverfield now for 23 years. I graduated from Oklahoma State University and then got my master's and my doctorate from the University of Oklahoma. Is there anything else?
That sounds wonderful. Thank you, Jennifer. Ella Claire, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Ella Claire Covington. I graduated from the University of Arkansas's Birth Through Kindergarten program this past May. And since then, I have been hired on as an infant teacher at the Gene Tyson Child Development Center here on the University of Arkansas campus. So I'm just settling into that role and starting my career as a teacher right now.
Wonderful, thank you. Gina, could you tell us about yourself?
Good morning, I'm so happy to be here. Excuse me, Gina Dickey. I actually started life as a 5th grade teacher. So I have a degree in education. Did not get into early education until my oldest son was 1. Which I think is how a lot of people start in early education. So I've been in the field for 26 years. It's easy to do the math. And, but most of my work has been around leadership, organizational management, and systems development. I have a master's in public administration, which I received actually while being in early education. I took a different kind of route into how I could support my field, more supporting the adults who support the children than working with children directly. And as my husband says, my hobby is lobbying. Some moms scrapbook and bake, some moms go to the Capitol. So that's how I got involved early on.
Thank you all so much. We're really excited to hear more of your perspectives, and I love the range of experiences you have. We have a novice teacher, we have a teacher who's been in the field for a number of years, we have private lab school setting, we have a public school setting, and then we have administrators and that lobby and systems theory perspective. So I think it's going to be a really great conversation. And I have a number of questions. I thought I would open with a general one for you all, which is, how has the COVID pandemic presented challenges to your day-to-day work within the field of early childhood education?
I would say that one of the biggest challenges we've had, I would say that there's 2 really big ones alive right now. At the beginning, I think it was figuring out how to balance the identity of the school and what we believed about education and the necessary precautions for keeping everyone safe. So we approached it much the same way we do with licensing or NAEYC, where there are guidelines, but it has to bump up against who we are. As well. And so we actually we did what we needed to do to keep everyone safe, and then tried to use every opportunity we could as a launch for a new study or a new line of inquiry for teachers or for students. And so that was one challenge. And then the other challenge that I think has run most pervasively through is managing the anxiety of families and of teachers. Because as you know, there's a spectrum of opinions and beliefs around COVID and the ways in which you mitigate that, or if you mitigate that. And that can create a lot of different various kinds of anxiety, and it shifts and morphs from day to day. And so one of the biggest roles, in addition to maintaining culture within all of the things that need to happen with a pandemic, is helping everyone cope with whatever anxiety they have regarding the situation. The children do not seem anxious. It's the adults. The children are great. The adults are not great.
Robin and Ella Claire, do you find that it's similar for you, that the children are not showing so much anxiety? Do you find it challenging to work with families based on their anxieties?
I would agree. The children are very resilient. I mean, they, you don't see much differences in the way they behave and the way they, conduct themselves in daily interactions and things like that. We try to keep it as normal here as possible for them, make them feel like they're in a very safe place. So I would agree. It's more, anxiety with the staff and adults involved. But one of our major concerns at the beginning was parent interactions, daily parent interactions, because we welcome the parents to come in, and I love to build those relationships with the families and want them to feel welcome as well. And so that was a very big concern, but we've worked with it and we still have that relationship with the parents, maybe not to the same level, but we're working on it.
Are there specific things you've done to maintain those relationships with families?
Yeah, so we do pick up and drop off outside every day. So we still get to see them on a daily basis, but we also use apps that we communicate with them. We almost daily post things the children are doing in centers, and we post work samples, things like that. And the parents are able to interact with us on that.
How about you, Ella Claire? How does your classroom experience vary? What are the challenges?
The biggest thing for me has been interactions with parents as well. It's interesting because I'm with like an entirely new group of infants. These families and these children are all like, this is their first experience with school. So they're not necessarily having to like adapt to previous experiences, but they're coming into this like new strange world where we're like already we would be having to build new relationships and like try to build a classroom family community. And so it's harder to do that with like when they can't come into the classroom and we can talk to them and hang out with them and get to know them better. So it is a lot based on like our relationships are heavily based on the pick up and drop off, and then just communicating throughout the day, lots of texts and emails, and trying to keep that door open for them, even though they can't necessarily come into the classroom, has been a bit of a challenge, but we've been able to do it, I think, pretty well.
Thank you. Gina, how about you? How has COVID presented challenges to your day-to-day work? Your day-to-day looks a little different, but what have those challenges been for you?
I don't feel that I've had any. And in fact, in some ways, it's created this opportunity for me to connect with more people across the state in a way that might have required you to be in a meeting in Little Rock in the middle of the day. And now that's not plausible. So because it's not plausible from a health restriction wise, we rethought what we're doing. And I think connecting with more people in a lot of ways, like today, I think the attendance today says we might have done this in a different way before. And now we have people all over the state. I would like to piggyback on what my colleagues are saying, as far as my observation about how I feel like it's impacting people across the state. One of the things I've said to colleagues over the years is it's not always what we do, it's how we do it. Right? Like I kind of believe that you can almost take any curriculum and deliver it developmentally appropriately. Thank you for the nodding, right? It's in the how. And what I hear you is it's in the how, like what I engaged with families before, and now I've rethought that. I'm using an app, or I'm, just making that adjustment. What I hear from people and what concerns me is In Arkansas, we can hire nice and train for staff. And so this is an exceptionally qualified group of colleagues, and that's not the norm, right? I also believe life's a bell curve, and you guys are way on that upper end of awesomeness, right? And so when you look at what people know how to do, if we hired nice and trained, I know one way to do this, and this has messed with my one way, and I don't have that same set of tools and a toolbox beside me that I heard you say you pulled from, or you probably had conversations with colleagues down the hall who share that same sort of knowledge and experience, and together you've come up with the right way. So I think these kinds of adjustments have been huge hurdles for many of our colleagues who just don't have the same set of skills. And Laura, I really, really appreciate what you said, which I think connects with what this group said too. It's about the comfort of the families and the parents. And so that statement from NACI about how vulnerable we are financially, right? So if we're already operating on razor thin margins pre-pandemic, if families aren't comfortable, they keep their kids at home, those who have that option. And now we're trying to do more and different with less. And money is not always the answer, but in this case, it is a huge variable about enrollment.
Thank you so much, all of you. And the next question actually follows really naturally on from where you began, Gina, thinking about the resilience and abilities to overcome adversity within this framework of COVID-19. So since the beginning of the pandemic, where have you all, panelists, seen examples of resilience or that ability to overcome adversity, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's more at the systems level? We'd love to hear about that resilience and overcoming.
I think the whole situation has mandated that you have to be responsive and resilient. I mean, there isn't another choice. It's exactly what she was just talking about, in that if you have a fixed mindset and there is just this one way to do it, you're beating your head up against the same brick wall over and over again. And so in order for the system to redesign so that you can be resilient, right? It's all of it. It has to start with how you organize the system to begin with. Then the communication with the teachers and the ways, the mindsets and dispositions that you're cultivating with that. And you know, you had a choice. You could go in and be burdened by the new requirements, or you could go in and say, these are our new requirements. What are we going to do with this? How can we innovate around this? And so I think that, and I think to your point, I have the luxury of having a place and people that think in that way. But, you know, we brought big white tents, the event tents on campus, and have them spaced all over so that middle and upper school classes can meet out in those tents. Our classes are outside on the campus almost all day, every day. And what that did was launch a study into the relationship between children and nature. And, you know, we had to order new equipment for children. The children brought in new equipment so they could stay warm and dry and those things. But it has created some really great inquiries and action research around campus. That then the focus becomes on that and not on the new requirements that COVID has brought along. So trying to keep our minds focused and our actions focused on quality education in every way that we can, and just taking care of the other things as you do, but building on top of that. So I would say that's where I've seen the greatest resiliency, is moving beyond the regulations and focusing on why we're all here. And maintaining, instead of we can't because, we could if, and coming up with lots of answers to that.
Thank you. What else? What other examples have we seen, or have you seen, of resilience and overcoming within this COVID context?
And just to kind of follow up on what Jen was saying, I totally agree. And that was one of the most important things that we could have done at the very beginning of the school year was, first I had meetings with ABC and with DHS and things like that to get all of our guidelines and what the expectations were from you know, our state and all that, but then just planning here as a team in our center, like, okay, these are our guidelines. How are we going to address it? What are we going to do to fit what we do here at our school, you know, and just having everybody be a part of that team and letting them help us decide this is what we're going to do, you know, and just everyone being comfortable with the guidelines. And yeah, at first, not everybody was like, this is all new to us, you know, but everybody played a part in that. And so we got to discuss it, and maybe someone had a different idea, and we just all integrated our ideas and came up with our plan for the center. And I think that helps too, just everybody being able to have a say, and we as a team agree on that. That also helps everyone to build that resiliency. And we too have spent a lot more time outside as far as the children and things like that. Sometimes we use them as our gauge. You know, we may be in the classroom doing things, and then it seems like, okay, I think they're ready to be outside. So, you know, it's nice to just have that outdoor space that we can have more outside time. And I feel like even being in the public schools, you know, sometimes it's, oh, you guys were outside longer than but it's this year, it's not, you know, it's y'all do what you need to do for the children, you know, so it's been really great. So the children are doing so much more like learning outside with nature and exploring things outside. And we've had so many like talks about insects and different things we see in the playground. And then we come inside and we look up, oh, I wonder why that insect looks like that, or what does it eat? You know, just investigating more. So.
Wonderful. Ella Claire, what would you like to add, if anything, about those examples of resilience in the classroom?
So as like someone who's like newer to the field, or at least as being like a leader in a classroom, it's been interesting because normally, like, I feel like if I were in this position, I would be able to maybe combine with the classroom beside me and sort of see what they're doing, and we would have sort of consistent people who were in our classroom who would maybe learn with us, or I would be able to like go into other classrooms and observe and sort of see what other teachers are doing more. And I do have the privilege of being in a lab school where there are observation rooms, so I can still like peek into other classrooms without going in and breaking that sort of COVID barrier safety net. But it's been a situation where I've been having to figure out how to learn from my peers, and then my assistant teacher is also relatively new to the field and doesn't have as much experience as I do, so she's learning from me and I'm learning from other people, and then our part-time staff are learning from us, and so we're all having to figure out how to do that in a way that's different than what we would normally do. It's a little bit of that separation of community than we would normally have within our school, and sort of trying to figure out how to bridge those gaps in a way that's still safe for everyone involved. And then also like a little small resilience thing, a little different. We were really worried at first about the babies with the masks. We were worried about them not being able to read our faces, like not see us smile, not like, because, you know, if you're sitting there trying to bond with the baby, you're going to make faces, you're going to talk to them and sing and all these sort of things. We were really worried that they maybe wouldn't get as much out of that with the masks. But we found that they are incredibly resilient to that. They can tell when we're smiling, they can feel our emotions, they respond just as well as they normally would have, even if they can't necessarily see our face. So I'm always really impressed by them and how they've adapted to the situation themselves.
Thank you. That's fascinating and really encouraging for those babies. Gina, what, if anything, would you like to add about thinking about resilience in particular?
Limitless examples of resiliency. I think we're a pretty adaptable population already, right? Like that's one of the things I love about my colleagues. One of my favorite quotes is that Theodore Roosevelt about do what you can where you are with what you have, right? And I think this has just ramped that up. What I hear though from my colleagues is an understanding or emphasizing the understanding of how important leadership is, right? That what I heard you say were things like communities of practice and reflective practices, or communities of learners. And I think that we have really shown, we've known, I'm a big fan of the McCormick Center for Early Childhood Leadership, and they've been, leading a lot of conversations around the importance of having leadership, having the skills and knowledge that they need. And I think this has really put an emphasis on that. And what I hear from my colleagues is they have that. And so what about the programs who don't have that? That they don't automatically, as Robin referred to, as coming to a collective decision about what's going to work best for us, and how to shoulder. I appreciate what Jen said about knowing what we know about early childhood development, and when it bumped up against, right, the health components, right? So that having those kind of dialogues, more and more of that happening, but also my concern about the programs who don't have that same level of relationship. I think we can look at the state by state of how we have managed this pandemic and know that leadership is essential, right? In every aspect. We're not just talking about early childhood, but in every aspect of this pandemic.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question to dig a little deeper with this idea of resilience. That I think it's the perfect timing for it. Do you see some of those, Robin and Jennifer, all of you actually have provided some examples of particular examples of ways in which learning happened that were different, that were exciting for children? Actually, especially what I heard was a little bit of a theme emerging about outdoor learning and nature study. So I don't mean to limit it to that one example, but do you see those as almost silver linings? Are there other silver linings of the pandemic? And if so, how should those impact our idea of best practices? Do they expand them? Do they, bump up against them? How could they be sustained? Should we be advocating for those? That's kind of a lot in one question, but I would love to hear a little bit more about that idea of silver linings, and where should we go from here if we see these opportunities emerging? Should that be something we embrace in the longer term?
I actually think Gina hit on it when she was talking about how the fixed mindset really gets in the way of people when you bump up against this. And so the pandemic, it's no longer the leadership or the organization saying, hey, we really need an innovative mindset here in order to create the highest quality learning. It is by mandate, we're going to have to be innovative to be who we know we need to be, right? And so one of the things it has done is demanded innovation. And I would say that that's been a positive role in early childhood. I think it's been a positive role in middle and upper school, as well as schedules get redefined, as thinking about how children are going to socialize. There's no way to humanely get in the way of that. And so we have to be innovative in the structures that we put in place for that to be able to take place at those older ages. And then at the younger ages, again, I go back to the innovation. And then for specifics, I think that some classroom communities have grown very strong because they are spending an extraordinary amount of time together. I think teachers have had to find new ways to work together. Everybody committed to being in a collaborative environment. So we've had to be innovative in how we go about that and what that looks like. But still maintain, like I said before, still maintain the commitment to all of those values that we hold true. Just come up with new ways for that to look like. As Robin was saying, when you met at the beginning of the year to decide as a group, you couldn't meet in the same way that you had before. So you had to come up with, how do we do this 6 feet apart with masks, with spaces? They really become a big issue. And so we figured out outdoor spaces and how to project onto a screen in a white tent, and all kinds of new ways. And then I think the point about the nerve being anxious, and then the infants figuring, the infants are okay. All of us have had to renew our faith in the competencies of children because they have very much shown us exactly how you go about being resilient and adapting to a new environment. while still being children, because that's what they do. And so I think that's also a silver lining. I don't know if all of that made sense, but that's my contribution.
Thank you. It did. I love that. And maybe after we hear from everyone else on this, I would love to pick up on that. And I see actually a question from the audience about that, about what we've learned from children. So, but thinking back about that idea of the silver linings, Robin, do you have something that you would add to that?
Yes, so with our classroom sizes, generally in ABC programs, we have a 1-to-10 ratio. So we have 2 teachers and 20 kids, 20 children in the classroom. And this year, with everything going on, our attendance is lower, and it's been fabulous. I mean, we're able to really strengthen those relationships that we have individually with every child in the classroom. You know, we have 16 kids still, but just those 4 children make a big difference in the classroom. So we have thoroughly enjoyed it, and it would be nice if, you know, that would continue in the future. But I know with, you know, funding and things like that, there's all those other things to take into consideration. But that has definitely been one of our silver linings. We have thoroughly enjoyed those deepening of relationships with the children in our classroom. And the number 4 doesn't seem like it would make that much of a difference, but it truly does. It truly does. And there was something else I was going to say about that, but I'm not sure what it was. But anyway, yeah, that's definitely been a great experience from this.
Thank you. And when you think of that other thing, just hop in, no problem.
I have also definitely felt that silver lining from lower numbers, especially with it being my first year with a new group of infants and families. It was really nice to be able to sort of slowly work in and build bonds with at first 3 kids and then 4 and 5. And like even today we have 5 children in our class, and it's nice because we get to spend that one-on-one time, like you said, with them, and get to build those more individual relationships and figure out where they're at and what they need, as opposed to just being thrown in with 8 new babies at the beginning of the year. It's been a nice little extra pleasure and time to spend with them.
Thank you. Gina, anything to add?
Just that I think totally taking us out of the classroom, but people being much more aware of how essential we are to the infrastructure of their community, right? They don't see us as something parents need to worry with, like that's the parents' responsibility, because employers know that if the child care center closed in their area, then the parents are having difficulty getting to work, right? So getting to the level of attention we should have always been. I think that's the silver lining. But also what I hear from this group is when we learn things like reduce ratio, right? We've always known that was the way to go, right? But if we somehow can then turn to that so that we, as you pointed out, we got to do better than we're not going back. Going back is not the option. How do we move forward, and how do we take this point in time to educate us on best how to do that? And I think what I heard from you was, you know, that warm, engaging interaction that we know is the most important and most critical part of a quality early education setting can be done better when there's fewer kids to do it with, right? It's not, we knew that, duh, but will parents see a difference, right? And can we get parents to advocate, wow, it really felt different, better when there were fewer kids in my son's classroom than there was when there was all 20, right? So I think those kind of things that we can build on as we move forward.
Do you have specific advice? You have your finger more on the pulse of lobbying and, you know, thinking at that level. Is there anything else you would add other than maybe capitalizing on these moments with parents that we can be engaging in as advocates?
I do think we could have a whole other session just on the how to engage.
We should.
Right?
Right.
Maybe we will. But connecting with organizations that can help you with that. Arkansas Early Childhood Association has just finished a strategic plan, and we're going to be placing much more emphasis on policy work for our members. Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families has always made early education one of their agenda items. So connecting with people who do that, both of those organizations, I think, really want to hear from people about what it is we should be asking for, right? And so I think there's this two-way communication with these advocacy organizations. And I think, but parents, we have way underutilized them as a resource, right? I mean, who could speak better to this than them, especially current consumers or past consumers, because most legislators see us as just part of the supply and demand for how the sausage gets made. But there's so much more to that. And so I think somehow engaging families to speak on behalf of what their own needs are can really be powerful.
Thank you so much. Building on that idea of advising and advising us how to be advocates, what advice would you panelists give to others, educators, staff, administrators, parents, could be at the policy level, that will propel us forward, thinking about what the conversation has yielded so far. So what advice could you give? And it could be from parents to coworkers.
I'm not really sure what my advice would be yet. I think right now the advice would be to really keep focusing, no matter what the adverse situation is, to focus on what you can control and to innovate around that. And so I guess that's my biggest message as far as advocacy moving forward. I think everything we've talked about so far, and I think we have the attention. I think the point is that we have the attention of people we haven't always had the attention of, and it's time to make our voice heard. And so to figure out in what ways schools and parents and communities can tap in and make a difference moving forward. So understand that we have a silver lining that we can optimize on and commit to that, I guess.
Thank you. Anyone else have advice that you would share to educators, staff, parents, administrators?
Things I had written down before we even started having these conversations was just advocating for some of the things that we have talked about, like having more outside time for the children, not only in a pandemic, just in general, and how maybe educating some professionals on how to utilize that outside time, how to make it engaging learning experiences for the children and things like that. And then also advocating for those smaller ratios.
Thank you.
I think my advice to other educators and whatnot would be just to try your best to be flexible. All the time, but especially right now, because not everything is going to go how you expect throughout the day, throughout the week. There can be miscommunications or cross messages, and all sorts of things can sort of go amiss. And so just sort of rolling with that and learning how to bounce back from it and refocus. And also just focusing on relationships, whether it's relationships with your peers, your coworkers, especially relationships with the children and their families. Because I think that's sort of the most important thing, is as long as you've gotten to the end of the day and you've done something to build a relationship or something positive for that, then I think that can be considered a win, even if it's been a hard or challenging day.
Thank you. Gina, anything to add before I ask our next question?
I think if I could challenge my colleagues on this call, that I absolutely agree with the focus on what you can do. I'm a big Covey, Stephen Covey, 7 Habits fan, right? You have your circle of control and your circle of influence. And I think reserving some energy every day, week, month to work on that circle of influence also, right? That's how we're going to move forward, right? The majority's got to go on my so much power I have to provide for children in my presence, right? So that obviously is where my brain and my energy, my time needs to go. But then if we can reserve just a tad over here for this piece, so that when, so I just included Alliance for Early Success has created a document called Build It Back Stronger. And Alliance has done work in every state in the country now, and they have national experts that advise those state advocacy organizations. And so they've really created this network of kind of subject matter experts in a wide variety of ways, and they worked very hard on this document. And so I think it hopefully provides kind of a guide that we might all collectively look to move forward. And so like familiarizing yourself with that kind of information and saying, oh, this thing in this national document would really be helpful in my community, right? And then using that credible resource when you're educating others on why this should be included, and that's part of a bigger picture. And I realize I'm frozen. It's not the worst face I've ever made. So, good. But I can hear you guys great. So
Yeah, we hear you loud and clear. Thank you for that resource.
Can I add one thing?
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay? I'll be fast.
Of course.
Okay.
Please.
So I think in thinking about teachers and the daily life in a school, I think the management of energy is a really important piece to think about. So, and both Gina and, well, everybody talked about it. But it's not just about managing time, it's about managing your energy. And some of that is the ways in which you choose to be positive, how you choose to spend your energy, right? So you can get really upset because something has had to change, as Ella pointed out, right? Something had to change that nobody can control, and you can really get upset, or you can roll through that. And the amount of energy spent is different, right? It's not easy. It sounds like an easy thing to do. But if you really are conscientious about where you're placing your energy and how much goes to what, and really focusing on the things that they're talking about, relationships, and the daily life of the classroom, then it seems that people are more successful in ending the week or the month in a better place. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, it definitely does. Thank you. I know, Donna, I asked you to, if you would collect the questions and read them. And I want to jump in on one before I ask you what else you think we should offer up to the panelists, because I think it kind of aligns really well with the conversation right now. And that's a question from Michelle about how can those of us who provide professional development best support programs? Because a lot of the conversation that we're having is about those classroom moments, and then growth and resilience and that energy spending. So given all of that, if you could place an order for professional development for yourself or for your colleagues or your staff, what would that look like? What can people who provide professional development do to support programs during this time?
The strategy that we've used is we have an ongoing relationship with someone out of Italy, because we're a Reggio inspired program. So we meet we've dedicated Tuesday mornings for an hour and 10 minutes to have an ongoing conversation with her via Zoom. And we've kept it responsive to what's happening within the school, where we think we might focus, but really keeping it on the higher level thinking. And so it's almost like part of the rhythm and anticipating it is something outside of our norm and outside of COVID that can keep our energies and minds focused in a better way. So I think something that it can be ongoing and responsive, I guess, is what I would say.
Thank you. Robin or Ella Claire, what would you wish for? What would be helpful in terms of professional development and supporting during this time?
I feel like sort of along the lines of what Jennifer was saying about sort of like energy management and stress management within the classroom. I think having tools and training for that for educators, especially new educators, but even people who have been teaching for years, on how to continually find new ways to not only like manage stress like in the classroom itself, but within yourself, and especially when something like this is going on, how to be resilient within that and gain tools and tips and tricks and things like that. And then how you can also put out that energy to the people around you and help others.
Thank you.
I agree. I think that would be very beneficial. Just, yeah, about, I mean, the same lines they're talking about, and how to just promote maybe that positive energy, even for administrators, you know, training for them to help promote that positive energy within their settings and things like that, within themselves and within their setting for their staff as well.
Anything to add on that, Gina?
I think to remind colleagues in Arkansas that the professional development and technical assistance system we have available, like you could ask for a thought partner, which is what I heard Jennifer really saying, more of a coach mentoring that you could use in real time to just help you think through some ideas. And the advantage to that, not just to someone to bounce off of, but those colleagues might very well know of an organization down the road that is doing something that might help what you are needing help with. So I think just reminding people that maybe we rethink professional development and think of it more as technical assistance and accessing people that way.
Thank you for that reminder. That's great. Well, Donna, it's 10:50. Do you have a question that you would share with us from those that were submitted? I've seen things filling in and I haven't really been able to keep track of what's in there.
Yes, a lot of the questions have already been answered. But
Great.
before I give the question, I just want to say, y'all, what I hear all the adults are doing right now as educators and administrators is everything we're guiding children to do. We're guiding them to be problem solvers. So that's what's happening with that's what's happening with all the adults right now too. So we've got to put our words into action, right? So I think it's great seeing that everyone is doing what we're trying to guide children to do and being more intentional, just like with Ella Claire talking about, you know, not being able to see their facial expressions. You can see so much in the eyes of the people. And so it's making you be more intentional, more engaged in having those strength-based interactions with the children. Anyway, so on now to the questions. There are some great questions in the feed. One of the questions is, what do you think, what can adults learn from children about being resilient, about resilience? And I know y'all have answered it a lot through here, but if you could just hone in on this, what can adults learn from children about resilience?
I think the beautiful thing about children is that they just show up, right? So they come into school and the adults were wearing masks and there were some new guidelines and we couldn't share the playground. I mean, you know, there were things that were different. And they just kind of show up and move through that. Okay, so we can't do that, but we can do this, right? And they naturally begin thinking about, well, I can do this, 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 and this, right? Or inventing ways around whatever obstacles in their way. And I think that, and that they are generally a happy people, right? And they just kind of choose to be, they have moments and those moments are real. And I think we need to allow ourselves moments that are real, but then they bounce back from them and come back and show up the next day. And so I don't know. I I think our halls are filled with laughter. They're not filled with stressed out kids who are worried about COVID. You know, and so watching them and feeding on their energy and connecting with them, I guess. I don't know.
Thank you.
Well, just like in our environment here in the classroom, we have, you know, we make changes to the environment over different weeks and things like that. I mean, the children don't see that as something to stress them. You know, they see that as, ooh, this is something new. So I feel like, you know, and they just accept the challenge and figure it out. Oh, let's see how this works. What does this do? You know? And so as adults, just taking on that change as more of a challenge, and let's just figure out how to make this work. Like, I mean, that's what the children, that's what they do. And right, I mean, they're laughing, they're playing, you know, you would not know that there's a pandemic if you walked into the classroom. The children are very resilient.
Thank you, Robin. Ella Claire, what can adults learn from children during this time?
I mean, despite everything going on, my babies are still learning how to walk. They're still starting to move around. They're still reaching these like developmental milestones. They're growing, they're learning, and they're doing all of that while all this stuff is happening in the outside world. We're still building connections. We're still having like positive, strong relationships. We're playing, learning, growing, and all that can happen even though there's restrictions and challenging and stressful things going on. And I think that's my biggest takeaway from them is just we can still, even with the masks, even with not being able to be around other classes or other people, we can still have fun and learn and grow together, and just keep going.
Thank you. I see comments, by the way, before we, I'll ask Gina what you have to add, of just feelings of encouragement. You know, there is a lot of stress and sadness out in the world right now, but knowing that the kids are okay, I think is really heartening to people, and knowing that those, you know, that movement forward with development and those connections are happening and that laughter is there is a wonderful thing to hear. So Gina, what would you add at this point?
I think exactly what you just said, Laura, and I'm thinking how this question, which didn't seem to weave in a lot of things we've talked about before, in my mind weaves in so many things. So maybe my challenge to anyone listening today is that when you're focused, that as we talked about, the time, the energy, that also think about how you might share the beautiful things that you have the opportunity to see so many moments in your day, that sharing out through a media platform that you're using with families or in other ways about how things are challenging, but we're doing okay. I can just imagine how much that helps a family feel very good about being at work while they're there with you in these health concerns. And I think not to underestimate how that family then passes on that very same message to the grandparents or other colleagues or families. And that also may be the strongest thing we can do for family engagement, which is how we started this conversation, and the strongest thing we can do to advocate, right? That people see us as the uber professionals we are, that are, you know, educating young children and keeping, you know, it provides hope for the future. So I think sharing what you get to see in a really systematic way, maybe more thoughtful way, is the challenge. How do we educate our legislators or all the wonderful things that are happening in your program? They're already happening. You're already recording them. How do you share more broadly?
I love that, and that is a great challenge for us, and also opportunity for us. And that point has come up a few times. There's a focus on early childhood education that should have been there, that is kind of being forced at this moment because we are so critical, and we always have been. But now, you know, some parties are realizing that in a new way. And so we do have, it's a crisis. And I began with that kind of, at the beginning, that NAEYC statement, which does really highlight the dire nature of this moment, but also there are all these rich opportunities and moments of resilience. Jennifer, I don't know if, I hope you don't mind me asking you in particular, but I know your center has done a lot of thinking about being representing and documenting the work that you do and sharing that, and that's been kind of a feature. What would you pass on to us about how to do that, how to do what Gina is encouraging us to do?
I think probably our most effective, well, one of our most effective means that we do is daily we send out images. We send out something called the Today. It's like a journal that includes images from the day and the work. And explaining kind of what's happened, the fun things that have happened, that's the daily moments, but then also the focus on the learning for that day. And it ends up being a couple pages of happy, well-adjusted, engaged children that don't look any different this year than they looked at last year. If you were to pull our journals from last year and this year, you would see more outside images. But you would see the same materials, you would see the same kinds of experiences, just ramps and pathways coming through a tree versus down a ramp that's made in a classroom, right? And so exploring things in a new way. And so it's almost like this daily reminder of, hey, your kiddos are here and they're happy and they're engaged and they're moving forward. And that sends that message out daily. And then they, people look forward to that and they pass it on to grandparents and nannies and whoever else. And then I was talking at the beginning of this conference, and today is typically our visiting day where families and grandparents, everybody's on campus, and we'll have 1,000 people roaming around campus. Obviously that couldn't happen today, and so we created a virtual version of that. And have uploaded PowerPoint presentations on the work that's happened in each of the classrooms through something called, I think, ThinkThing. I keep calling it Thingalink, but Thingalink, I guess, is what it is. And so parents and grandparents and anyone associated with the school can visit the school in its entirety and just click on a button. And if you click on all of the buttons, you see a robust, happy year. And so I think the more you can include images and the more you can communicate what is happening and the ways in which children, as we've all said, keep it normal and positive, the better off we are. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. And I think moving from that to how do we advocate not only to parents, but how do we save some of that energy. I love that way you put that, Gina, and save just a little bit of that energy for that other circle of influence, because that's got to come next. And I would love to have another panel discussion where we focus on that piece, on moving from everything that emerged today to how do we then make noise to get what we know children deserve and educators deserve. Because we are at this critical moment. And coming back to where we started, look at all these opportunities and all these beautiful things that are happening, but we don't want to go back as a field, as an overall field, to where we were, because we deserve better. And so advocating for that is going to be a critical next step. It is a little past 11, so as much as I would love to hang out with you in this coffee talk time and keep on talking, I have to let you all go. And thank you so much for joining us. I know that this discussion will be available. It was recorded, so if you wanted to revisit any of the resources, then you're able to do that. It will be on the Arkansas Alumni Association YouTube page soon. And we thank you all so much for joining us, especially our wonderful panelists. Thank you for taking the time.